Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. So the current talk in the bodybuilding scene is mainly revolving around Hadi Choopan. Hadi just won the Arnold Ohio and the Arnold UK, and he made drastic and rapid improvements in order to win those shows. I think it's clear that the 2024 Arnold Ohio was Hadi's best version ever, and the UK version wasn't far behind. Now a lot of the discussion is based around how good is Hadi and that physique he brought to the Arnold. On the Project Bodybuilding podcast last week, Mark's Max Muscle Discord, and I were discussing a recent Instagram post from Who is the Best Bodybuilder. He posted this, just asking where Hadi ranks in terms of the best of all time. And my guest and I discussed this for a little bit, and we concluded that Hadi, with his 2024 Arnold Classic package, could probably be a lot more guys than fans would expect. We talked about Arnold Classic winners, Olympia champions, and threw in a couple of other names too. And we thought Hadi would stack up very well to a lot of the best physiques in history. One we were really hung up on though was the vampire himself, Dexter the Blade Jackson. Now initially I brought Dexter into the discussion because I saw this comment on the original post being discussed, and I quote, "Practically this era's Dexter Jackson. Not an overpowering physique, but always on point with conditioning, and makes little improvements consistently." I think that perfectly sums up the situation. Now in terms of physiques, Hadi and Dexter are obviously very different, but in terms of the niche they fill in their respective eras, it's pretty similar. Hadi has never been outside the top 4 at any Mr. Olympia, and Dexter has always been in the mix at any show he entered, if he already wasn't the outright favorite going in. Both of these guys have always been there to capitalize on the bigger guys' mistakes, and that's how they both won their Olympias. Jay was off big time in 08 when Dexter won his only title, and Rami was probably even more off in 2022, which meant Hadi could pick up the slack, and that he did, and he won. So even in terms of their track record, there are some similarities. And like I said, they're basically filling the same niche in their respective eras, so this should make for an interesting matchup. But who would have won at their best? Let's jump into this comparison to try and figure out who would win between both of these guys' best versions. For Hadi, that will be his 2024 Arnold Classic version, and for Dexter, I know he won in 08, but I think he was actually a touch better in 2009. So I went with that Olympia version for Dexter. But really, he was so consistent that there was hardly a difference between the two, but both of those are probably in his best by popular opinion. So to add to the discussion of where does Hadi place in the best of all time, let's see if he can beat the legendary Dexter Jackson. If you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. We're starting off with a bang here in the front double. This is a battle. Now sizing these guys was a little bit weird. They only stood together a little once at the 2019 Mr. Olympia, and they're both roughly the same height. I think Hadi is actually a little bit taller, but he squats down like all of his poses, so most of the time these guys are going to be the same height or thereabout. Let's break this one down because these guys can go back and forth. Let's go body part for body part, starting from the ground up. In terms of the legs, and this will be a common theme throughout this comparison, I have Hadi. Dexter's legs are very solid, but Hadi is just next level on all metrics. His legs are slightly bigger and they're drier and more separated. They have that grainy look to them. Now let's go up to the torso and the midsections where we have different things going on, of course. Dexter's abs were always great and his midsection was always pretty tight. I always thought his stomach had a little too much of a rounded look to it though, but I think I'm in the minority on that opinion, so I digress. And his shoulder and lap to waist ratio is overall very solid. This is an overall great torso, but Hadi is again better. His waist is just as small as Dexter's, if not slightly smaller, and he's wider through the shoulders and the lats, giving him the more drastic and the better V-taper. Hadi clearly wins the torso and the legs too, so with the better V-taper up top and the better legs on the bottom, he cuts the overall better outline / X-frame. So he gets a very important win in the silhouette department. But there is one more thing to look at here, the arms. Here I think Dexter does take a win, but Hadi is absolutely no slouch. The things that hurt Hadi are the shorter biceps and the skinnier forearms. Dexter has the much more appealing shape to his bicep, they're filling in more of that upper arm gap, and the overall set is more balanced since he has full bis, tris, and forearms. And his overall arms, bi, and tri are just bigger than Hadi's. But Hadi does still have some good peak and some good hardness to his arms. Again, no slouch here, I just slightly prefer Dexter. However, that win in the arms just isn't enough, even for a pose called the front double. Are the arms important? You bet. Is the outline of bodybuilder cuts important too? Yes, and if you ask me, even more so. The outline is like 70% of the pose for me, at least, just because the entire physique is considered when looking at the silhouette. And in terms of the arms, Hadi's weren't bad. Dexter's are better, sure, but Hadi does enough. Not to mention on a pure body part basis, Hadi won more body parts like the legs and the midsection. So these guys are both great. Dexter's outline is superb and his arms are great, but Hadi's outline is better than Dexter's, and that is weighted more in my judging personally, on top of Hadi's arms being solid. So I gotta go with Hadi for this first pose. The front lat spread should be another win for Hadi, but somehow I think he looks a bit odd. Again, let's start with the legs, where it's really no question Hadi wins easily. His asymmetry in the quads is much more noticeable here though, but I still think he beats Dex on every metric. Now in terms of the waistline, I think they're roughly similar size, but in terms of the entire torso taper, I do prefer Dexter. This leads us to the lats, where we have an interesting trade-off here. I prefer Dexter's taper, but his lats are not as wide as Hadi's. Hadi's wider through the shoulders, we saw that in the front double, and his lat width is greater too. But Hadi's lats don't taper as low as Dexter's. Dexter has the lower inserting lats, and because his waist is on par with Hadi's, that gives him the important win in the V-taper department. But Hadi gets the win in the true width. But from here on out, and all those upper body extras, if you will, Dexter wins. The arms and the delts are so much fuller, and so are his forearms. I'm really only mentioning these though because Hadi is throwing me off with his skinny forearms and because his arms just shrink in this pose. And speaking of the delts, Hadi's are looking sus. Dexter's are full and there are some striations in there. They look normal. Hadi's medial delts are pointy. Whether it's habitual gear use or synthol, it really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, there are weird lumps in his delts and that throws me off big time. And it's a big issue. So even though Hadi is wider in the lats and the shoulders, with the flaws and with all that Dexter does right, I have Dexter winning the upper body. His taper is better, his delts and the chest and especially the arms complement his physique very well, and he doesn't have the weird delt issue or the other imbalances in the upper body. Now he definitely loses the legs, and again he's not as wide as Hadi, so Hadi based on those things makes this somewhat close, but I just like Dexter too much. He's so much more appealing to me and still wins important aspects of this pose. Now we're going back to yet another competitive pose here when these guys turn to the side for the side chest. They again do different things well, but not everything is perfect. Let's start from the bottom up again. I think in the side leg, for all intents and purposes, we kind of have a draw. I don't really see a major difference in detail, nor really in size. Maybe Dexter's a little bigger, but Hadi may be a touch more detailed. They're so close, I'm not really going to waste time splitting hairs. Let's just call it even. Now in terms of the arm and delt, the upper limb, I again have Dexter. Dexter's delts are, well, real. They're fully striated with a lot of pop and that capped off look. The arm is actually pretty close, but Dexter yet again brings in the bi, tri, and forearm, so take that for what you will. Overall, in the upper limb, again, I have Dexter. Overall, in the upper limb, I have Dexter. Again, the weird pointy delts on Hadi hurt him and are still visible here. Now, on the pecs, I'm going with Dexter. His pecs are much fuller, and both of these guys are striated, so the extra thickness in Dexter's chest is enough for him to win the area. Now, Hadi does have one important thing going for him. That is the insane shoulder-to-shoulder width. Just zoom out and look at these two physiques as a whole. Look how insanely wide Hadi is. He just takes up so much space next to Dexter. And even though he has the slightly worse pecs, just because he has them on that massive frame, it really bolsters Hadi's argument to win this pose. Sure, we want to see good pecs here in this pose, but looking huge and seriously wide is also important. Dexter's lucky he is so full and brings that compact mass. Hadi does get closer on this one with that structure, but Dexter does have the upper body, the pecs, the delts, the arms, and all that pop and roundness too. He was known for that 3D look, and that helps him here. It really makes him look bigger than he actually is. He looks more filled in. And with the lower body being even, I think Dexter does enough to overcome his narrower structure compared to Hadi. He looks stacked, full, thick, more so than Hadi. Hadi is just wide, which is important for the side chest, but being thickly developed is more important. And of course, Dexter won all those body parts, including the all-important chest. So overall, Hadi's overwhelming width is very impressive, but it's not overwhelming enough. Dexter's too stacked and too 3D for Hadi's extra width to carry him. The rear double is probably both of these guys' weakest link. They're just so solid from the front and the side that this back pose is probably each guy's weakest. But that still says a lot about each guy because these are still both solid rear doubles. I think Hadi does pull this one off though, but not really by much. He's really only winning on a few extra details in the back. Dexter's back is big, but in terms of details, Hadi rings out a few more through the upper back. But at the same time, Dexter has the fuller lats. So this really does get close because even in the back, they're trading off. But Hadi has the most detail, and that is the most important thing in the rear double. Now in the arms and delts, I again have Dexter. They're just much more appealing. In the lower body, I probably still do have Hadi from this angle, but not by as much as I did from the front shots. Their hamstrings are both shredded, but I'd give a slight edge to Dexter in the glutes. But in overall size and quad sweep from the rear, I have Hadi. Hadi is definitely lucky he has a bit more thickness and detail in the back, because in the grand scheme of things, Dexter's right there with him. And he has a very appealing physique even from behind. I wouldn't necessarily call Dexter aesthetic from this angle, I don't think that's the right word, but he has a very nice shape. I may even like him more subjectively. But objectively, Hadi has just a little more detail, and because that's what matters most, I have Hadi winning by a hair. Both gentlemen are infinitely better in the rear lat spread. I hit on Dexter's lats in the last back pose and we can see their full potential here. They're very full and insert very low. His taper is that perfect V shape. His traps are also very big and bulging. And look at that lower back, that is a stellar Christmas tree. And his lower body is even more solid than in the last back pose. But Dexter wasn't the only one to improve from the last pose because Hadi has not only maintained his lead from the last pose but has expanded on it. By now we know he's wider shoulder to shoulder than Dexter, and that translates to much wider lats. The width isn't close. His taper may not be as clean as Dexter's, but in terms of just pure width, Hadi dwarfs Dexter. Hadi also wins in terms of thickness. Sure, Dexter has huge traps, but Hadi's back is tighter and his traps are thick and more defined, and so are his spinal erectors. In terms of the lower body, it's again pretty close. Dexter's hams look even more peeled and his glutes are even more shredded compared to the rear double, but Hadi has solid glutes and hams himself while having more overall size. So they're close, but even if Dexter peels off a win from Hadi here, Hadi does enough in the back alone to win this pose. Dexter is phenomenal in this one. Hadi is just so incredibly wide. In fact, he beats a lot of guys that he shouldn't all the time. He currently beats Samson in this pose, even though Samson is much much taller, and he arguably even beats Derek Lunsford in this particular back pose. And that's just because Hadi's width is that amazing. He's just so wide for his frame. He's wider than Dexter, and that's kind of the end of it. Not to mention Hadi has all the superior detail in the back. But really that width alone is enough to win over Dexter in this pose, by a more comfortable margin than the last back pose too. The side try is an interesting pose. I don't think Dexter is as strong as he was in the last side pose. However, I just don't think Hadi is super impressive in this one either. At least not as impressive where he needs to be, like in the fullness and the thickness from the side and in the tricep. But Hadi brings his best attribute to this pose, detail. He has the more striated chest and the better midsection. Not only is it more cinched in than Dexter's, but his obliques are more shredded and the abs are more deeply defined. Now Dexter, like Hadi, isn't super impressive in terms of thickness from the side. He's pretty streamlined. This is actually a contrast from his last side pose where he won based on the extra roundness from the side. But Dexter gets an ever so slight win in the namesake of the pose, at least for me. Hadi's tricep is just shorter, so that leaves me liking Dexter's shape of his tricep more, but there's really minimal difference. Is that really enough for Dexter to win though? I don't think so. I can see the argument for Dexter, I guess, but neither guy is really getting knocked out. Since neither of these guys are really that thick nor carrying huge triceps, then I'm going to the next best thing, the extra details on Hadi. The side leg is similar, the triceps are, but the deciding factor here are those extra details on Hadi's chest and the more shredded midsection. And honestly, now that I'm looking back and at the physiques as a whole, I think Hadi is actually a little bit thicker and or wider than Dexter. So again, not a knockout, both guys are pretty similar, but Hadi brings something extra, better detail, which just scoots him over the finish line. Now we turn these guys to one of their best poses, the abs and thighs. These guys have some of the best abs and thighs of all time, but before we get to the midsection, let's start with the legs. Because once again, there is a quick conclusion. Like the other two aforementioned shots, Hadi takes the lower body easily. In overall size, the advantage isn't large by any means, but what wins Hadi the legs is his detail. He has that grainy look to his legs, the deeper separation, and the overall greater amount of detail with the more saran wrap look. So Hadi does win the first half of the pose. I think it is the less important half to be honest, but let's continue to the abs. Let me just say this, no one is a loser. As I said, we are looking at some of the best sets of abs of all time. And because they are so good, I do have to nitpick here. First and foremost, let's consider just the torso, and by that, I really mean the taper. I do think Hadi's shape was at its absolute best in this version. He's still somewhat blocky, but definitely he improved his lat to waist ratio. But Dexter still does win here. His taper has the much more apparent V shape, and this is an important aspect of the pose. But what about the actual ab development? Well, this is going to ruffle some feathers, but Hadi wins. Again, I really am nitpicking at this point because both of these guys are so great, but Hadi wins the obliques. He's got those piano keys on either side of his abdomen, and his ab separation actually looks just a hair deeper. Also, again a nitpick, but Dexter's lower stomach just protrudes ever so slightly. It always did though, and he usually still had one of the best abs and thighs poses in most of the events he did, including the Olympia lineups. But against another legend in the shot, small things like that, nitpicks, like a bit of a rounded stomach, matter a lot more. Hadi's stomach is completely flat by comparison. Anyway, with all that considered, I do think either guy can win the pose. A lot of fans will have Dexter for his great taper, and they'll say he has the more streamlined physique with a solid set of legs and phenomenal abs. But I am going to be on the other side of that argument, even if that is the less populous side. Hadi won the legs and the abs. And sure, he doesn't win the taper, but straight up winning both namesakes of the pose and open bodybuilding should be enough, at least in my opinion. I think I do like Dexter more, I have to be honest, but objectively, Hadi wins the abs and thighs, and by extension also wins, well, the abs and thighs pose. For the final pose, the most muscular, we're going to consider two variations. Up first, we have the crab variation. And yes, guys, I know the sizing is way off on this one. I mean, I guess they're somewhat close, but it doesn't matter. Hadi is solid on the pecs, traps, even the delts, and his buys look okay, but all of those body parts on Dexter are better. Not to mention, Hadi has some issues. His skinny forearms and lack of tricep sweep are yet again throwing me off. But Hadi does have some thick, dense pecs, and like I said, the buys and delts look fine, I guess. But I have Dexter just about everywhere. He was known for his traps, and we can see why. He beats Hadi there easily. He just has mountains on either side of his neck. The delts are again more real looking, they're just teeming with striations, and Dexter has the better tricep sweep and the more thickly developed forearms. Even his biceps are better than Hadi's. The chest is a little hard to judge because we see less of Dexter's, but I would say he is definitely not losing. But as to who really wins, that's a harder call to make. For one, we can't see, but two, Hadi is really good. I'm going to go out on a limb here though and say Dexter has a little more chest fullness and good enough detail himself to win here. But to be honest, I probably could have given him this pose based on the arms and delts alone. Now again, Hadi's okay in some areas here. He looks dense and detailed on the chest, and like I said, the biceps and delts are okay in this shot, but Dexter just does all of that better and then some. So Dexter wins this variation, but let's go on to the next. In our second variation, we have the hands clasp version. This is a more solid win for Hadi. We've seen Hadi's width advantage against Dexter throughout this comparison in a couple of shots. And here is probably the best display of the disparity between these two in that department. And in terms of most of the body parts, I have Hadi winning. The legs are a bit closer compared to other poses. Dexter really stepped up his game in this shot, but it comes down to the same things I've been saying. Hadi is a touch bigger and more peeled. Going up, I have Hadi winning the midsection easily. It's not even close. Now the arms are one area where I would most definitely have Dexter. Hadi again looks a little odd with the skinny forearms and lack of tricep sweep. sweep. Dexter brings some crazy fullness in his guns though. And the delts, I mean, in this pose it's really whatever, but Hadi looks fine here. The lumps really aren't noticeable from this angle in this pose. And finally, in the chest, we have a resounding victory for Hadi. Dexter's pecs don't convey that well in this pose for whatever reason. That probably has something to do with those thick guns and even the delts taking the spotlight and overpowering his pecs. But regardless, even though Hadi isn't the most thickly developed bodybuilder in the chest out there, he brings a ton of density and obviously the superior detail between the two. Overall, Hadi is by far the most impressive one in this shot. The level of details are crazy and he's winning most body parts by a lot. He only really leaves the arms on the table and really that's just the triceps and the forearms. And that simply isn't enough. I clearly have Hadi winning this one even though Dexter looks great. But now who wins the overall pose of the most muscular? Well, this one is going to get me into trouble for sure. Look, they're both great. I feel like I have to preface everything I say with that, but they are. But they each won one variation, but Hadi's win was more resounding. He did things right in the first variation, even though he lost. His chest and shoulders region in the crab shot was fine. I think he ultimately wins the most muscular by just averaging it out. Dexter won the crab, but Hadi was okay in some areas in that pose. Hadi won the hands class by more than Dexter won the crab, and he beat him resoundingly in most areas. Just by averaging these two things in my head leads me to the conclusion that Hadi Choopan wins the final pose of this comparison. Before we get into my concluding thoughts, let me preface what I'm about to say. This is not about who is the greatest bodybuilder, meaning the best legacy. I'm not looking at Arnold wins, Olympia wins, I'm simply talking about two physiques regardless of who they belong to. This video was simply about which of these two physiques wins a bodybuilding comparison. So with that said, let's not beat around the bush here. Hadi did win 6 of the 8 mandatory poses. He won the front double, both back poses, the side tricep, the abs and thighs, and the most muscular. Dexter won the front lat and the side chest. So just on a pure mandatory basis, Hadi wins. But let's be honest here, not only were a lot of those shots really close, but bodybuilding shows aren't just decided from those 8 poses. Dexter could have picked off a couple of more poses. Hadi could have maybe won one of his. They definitely can do a lot of trading around in a lot of those shots. So let's go a little bit further and let's take a look at what I call the overall physique metrics: shape, muscularity, flaws, and conditioning. Now in terms of shape, it's actually a tough one. Structurally, Hadi is wider, and I think just flat out better, especially because his waist was down and with his width up top, he's looking pretty good. But Dexter has the more appealing muscle bellies and probably the overall better balance. This one is really close actually, but I think this ultimately goes to Dexter. Hadi looks slightly blocky in a shot or two and he looks more like a bodybuilder. But that does help in the next category, muscularity. But then again, Hadi isn't winning this category by that much. I think he's just a touch bigger overall, maybe not as full as Dexter, but I think Hadi has just as much mass and more density and thickness in some areas. His back was better as a whole, the legs were too, and other things like the chest were close. But like I said, Dexter was very complete himself and that's what he was known for, and he was extremely full and round, giving off an illusion of more muscle. So I would give Hadi the win here, but by a hair. That brings us to conditioning, and I'm sorry, but even the blade Dexter Jackson is no match for Hadi Choopan's level of conditioning. Although, I don't think conditioning is exclusively just about the level of body fat. It has to do with the overall dryness and details being shown. Just because you have a lower body fat doesn't automatically mean you will have more details than someone else. And it doesn't mean you're as dry. Overall, these guys are probably similar in terms of body fat percentage, but Hadi had the more details just flat out. He had the better dryness definitely and the grainy look as well. And that may be for a variety of factors, but Hadi looked overall more shredded with his added dryness and details. Now that brings us to the last category, being the flaws. This one is actually pretty easy to decide. Dexter was dang near perfect in this comparison. There really weren't any major issues I could even mention in this category. But there is one major flaw for Hadi, and I can deal with the skinny forearms and the triceps. That's not what I'm talking about. Those things pale in comparison to whatever is going on in those delts. And to be honest, they looked even worse at the Arnold UK, so thankfully we're not using that version. But here, they still looked lumpy, pointy, whatever you want to say about them here in a few shots. So not only was Dexter basically flawless automatically, but with Hadi having a flaw like that, there was no way Dexter wasn't winning this category by default. And that brings us back to determining the winner. Hadi won the most important aspect of this comparison, the mandatories. And then both guys tied in the overall physique categories. Dexter won shape and the flaws categories, and Hadi won muscularity and conditioning. So after considering everything, I have to say, just to me personally, Hadi wins just barely. Now remember, I'm not saying Hadi is the better bodybuilder overall or has the better legacy, far from it. Hadi has simply not had the time nor even competed at the amount of shows that Dexter has. So in terms of legacy and track record, Dexter is clearly the winner. And even though Hadi might not be done with his career, I don't think Hadi will catch up. Dexter's career is one of the most decorated in history. He won basically everything at least once: Arnold Classics, the Olympia, and plenty of pro shows. Hadi may rack up another Olympia win, or maybe even multiple, who knows? But I highly doubt when he's all said and done, he'll have as decorated as a career as Dexter's was. But to be fair, not many will. However, we are not talking about careers in this comparison. We are talking about two physiques: 2024 Arnold Classic Hadi and 2009 Mr. Olympia Dexter. And I think Hadi wins just barely. If you ran the scenario 100 times, I would probably side with Hadi 52 times, maybe up to 55. Plenty of times I could absolutely have Dexter winning winning more mandatories and have him winning the comparison because of that. But as of right now, here's how I personally see it. Hadi wins narrowly because I see him as slightly more muscular and more conditioned, and his shape is pretty good now that he's brought his waist down. Dexter does still win the shape category though, and he has less flaws, which may be confusing to some viewers as to how he can lose when he's basically flawless, and I'm sure some people will have him winning on that basis. I almost did. Half of me still has Dexter winning on that alone. I have to be honest, I'm going back and forth even as I'm writing this, and still now that I'm reading this. But flaws only matter when you can see them, and in Hadi's case, the delts were not that big of a deal or just straight up not a factor in some poses. But in others, let's make no mistake, they're kinda gross. But he still won 6 poses anyways, and I was considering the delts too. So he won when we broke it down into mandatories, but on a whole physique basis, Dexter does better because he has plenty of size, shape, conditioning, and less flaws than Hadi. But we have to average those two things together. Hadi won 2 overall physique categories and won the majority of the mandatories, which to me in the open division matters the most. But then again, because Dexter does so well in looking balanced, having less flaws, and so on, he gets close. And if you have him winning, I wouldn't bat an eye. But I think very narrowly, Hadi just barely wins. But like I said, if we kept doing this comparison over and over again, Dexter would rack up a ton of wins just for me, let alone other fans out there. Dexter is a legend, sure, more so than Hadi, dare I say, but let's not underestimate Hadi. I think at minimum, even if you don't have Hadi winning this comparison, I think you can see how close this is. At least closer than most of us probably expected. But this definitely makes the original conversation that spurred this video a lot more interesting. We can agree to disagree on this one, I'm sure there will be a ton of disagreeing, but this physique that Hadi brought to the 2024 Arnold Classic was phenomenal. And I think that not only does he just barely win this comparison, but he can probably go toe to toe with a lot of other bodybuilding greats. So as the winner of this comparison, at least to me, and as this discussion was put more into focus and perspective for me, I can say that Hadi Choopan's 2024 Arnold Classic physique is truly one of the better bodybuilding physiques of all time. Maybe not enough to beat Dexter Jackson though. Maybe. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. This one is sure to cause a lot of controversy, so let me know what you think down in the comments. Let me know if you think Dexter wins, and let me know why. Or let me know if and why you agree with me. And also let me know where you think Hadi Choopan's Arnold Classic physique ranks in terms of the best of all time. Do you think maybe it's top 10, top 15? Let me know down in the comments. And if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. By the way, if you guys are looking for any high quality supplements to help you with your fitness goals, look no further than Arms Race Nutrition. Take a look at their wide variety of supplements, then at checkout use my code PROJECT10 for 10% off your entire order. That's code PROJECT10 at armsracenutrition.com. Finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Gotta get that Lexi, yeah.